Here, I'm going to dive in now this morning. Sometimes we set it up with a story. We're just hitting it hard. We're in the book of John, okay? John chapter 5. You have a Bible with you. You can open it up. If you've got it on your phone, you can do that. If you don't, good news. We got it on the screen. John chapter 5, starting at verse 1. Here's a story about Jesus that we want to learn from this morning. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Remember we learned in that video that John shapes a lot of the early part of his gospel around these 4 Jewish festivals that were really important. Okay, so Jesus is going up for one of those. Now, there is in Jerusalem, near the sheep gate, a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethsaida, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. So they want you to know this is a very particular pool in Jerusalem. Here, a great number of disabled people used to lie. The blind, the lame, the paralyzed, okay? So that was verses 1, 2, and 3. If you have the NIV or ESV open in front of you, you're going to notice something funny. Verse 4 isn't there. 1, 2, 3, 5. That's generally not how we count, unless it's a Python movie trying to make a joke. Deep cut for all of you who know what I'm talking about, okay? 1, 2, 5, right? This is not how we count, okay? So where's verse 4? Hold on to that for a quick second. Verse 5 says, one who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied. "Duh. But I have no one to help me get into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." And at once, the man was cured. And he picked up his mat and he walked. Now, reading the story this way seems a bit incomplete, doesn't it? What's the question we should all be asking? How does the water get stirred? Is it the wind? What is it? Certain times it seems that the water stirs, and then what we're told is that there's like a legend that if you jump in at that time, you can get healed from whatever's ailing you. How are the waters being stirred? That's what verse 4 is about. Okay? The mystery of the missing verse. Here's what it says. From time to time, an angel of the Lord would come down and stir up the waters. And the first one into the pool, after each such disturbance, would be cured of whatever disease they had. So, this man and all the people that are hanging around this pool are there because the pool has a reputation. There's a legend attached to it. Now, let me ask you a question. After hearing that, does it make any sense to you why verse 4 is left out of some of the most common scriptures? If it doesn't, that's okay. I'm going to explain it. Let's flesh it out for a quick second. Verse 4 seems to say that there's a game to getting healed. So randomly, with no notice, God sends an angel down to disturb these waters. And when those waters are disturbed, it's the bell that signals the start of the Hunger Games. If you can beat everybody else into the water, you get healed. And too bad for everybody else. They have to stay hurt, disabled, blind, whatever the condition is. You see the problem? What does that make God seem like? President Snow with an evil game that he's asking all these poor, crippled, blind, and lame people to participate in? Some people kind of think that's what God is like, right? Have you ever heard this before? Ever heard this version of God before? If you pray hard enough, if you just had more faith, if you just did this, then God would want to heal you. Right? It makes him sound evil. And that can't be right. So I don't know who added verse 4 in, but thank the Lord that most of the earliest manuscripts of John don't have verse 4 added in. Okay? So what it looks like is somewhere along the way, the question of how the waters got disturbed bothered people a lot. And somebody tried to come up with an explanation. But we leave it out. Because, if you want to know what I think, the legend isn't true. It can't be how God works. God cannot be maniacal. He cannot be President Snow. He cannot initiate the Hunger Games of healing. And then, if you come to that conclusion, Jesus' question makes so much more sense. Do you want to get well? It seems like a really silly question, doesn't it? Like he's there, hanging out around the pool that has a reputation for healing people with a whole bunch of other people who want to get healed. Do you want to get well? Jesus, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm here. But here's what Jesus is saying. If you want to get well, you are looking in the wrong place. Because that pool is not going to heal you. But I can. And I'm right here. I am the healing that you need. And if you think about it, doesn't that sound an awful lot like us? Looking everywhere else for healing, except looking to Jesus. God, I need you to solve my financial problems. All right, in my word, it articulates a way of being generous and managing your finances that explains how my kingdom works. Do this, and you will be like the flowers of the field, clothed and flourishing. Don't worry, trust me. Yeah, but God, that means I'm going to have less money tomorrow. So maybe not. Jesus would say to us, don't worry about tomorrow. Trust me. God, I need help with my mental health. It's like, good news, I sent doctors to you. They've talked to you. They've given you some medications to take. They've given you a pathway to healing. But God, it's a really long road. Yeah, I know. And that's why I gave you people to journey with. And a community that cares for you. But God, meeting with them and going to my therapist, it takes a lot of time. And I have other commitments. I have other friends that I'd rather hang out with. Yeah, but these are the kind of people you need. My people. They love you. I love you. Trust me. God, I want to be closer to you. Oh, me too. Come. Follow me. But God, I don't have any time in my calendar for that. Well, make room. But God, that means I have to sacrifice something else. And he's like, oh yeah, me too. But I had to sacrifice everything to be with you. Sometimes aren't we just like the invalid man? Jesus is right here, staring us in the face, saying, do you want to get well? And we're chasing a legend instead of the real source of healing. And the hard thing, I wish it wasn't this way. I really do. But if we insist on chasing the other legends, Jesus will let you. God has given you a will. And he's told you that it's yours to use freely. You can choose, and I can choose. Hear me say this again. That's why choice, is possibly the most spiritual thing you can do. His way or some other way. Because if you thought about it, like, what would have happened to that man if he actually made it into the pool? Like, these were the pools that people got baptized in, okay? So, fun fact, did you know that we borrowed baptism as a rite of passage from the Jews? So there were these baptism pools all over Jerusalem. People were getting baptized all the time. Baptism is not first a Christian thing. It's another thing that we borrowed from the Jewish community. And since we're Baptists, we have to assume that those pools were deep enough for full immersion. Right? You know? It's a thing. If you don't get that, that's okay. I know there's lots of non-Baptist people here. It's cool. Ask me later. I'll explain it. So flesh this out with me. A crippled man somehow gets into a pool of water that's over his head, and he does not get healed. What's the likely next result? Somebody is pulling a dead man out of the pool, not a crippled man. He drowns. He's not actually going to get healed. That's a myth. He won't suddenly be able to swim or push himself out of the water when it starts to fill his lungs. And I know that maybe that seems cruel to us. Maybe that makes God sound just as bad as President Snow God. Because he could stop us from making our silly decisions. He could stop us from making our destructive choices, but he won't. Because love requires choice. And you and I have been loved enough to be given the ability to choose. God does not violate your will in this regard. Think of it like this. There's a common sign at just about any train station in the world. Right? Mind the gap. Have you ever seen this at a train station, subway station? Mind the gap. Right? It used to be painted on yellow lines right at the edge of the subway tracks in Toronto. Okay? I don't know what the Vancouver version of that is. But that's where it was in Toronto. Mind the gap. Big letters, big yellow line. The idea was like, don't go beyond the yellow line until you're actually ready to get on a train. Why? Because if you stand there when the train comes by, there is a chance that the mirror, or worse, a big part of the train, will hit you as it goes by. It could not be more clear, right? Everybody can see. Well, everybody with sight can see the big gap. And then there's like announcements and warnings and like, we know, don't go past the yellow line until you're ready to get on the train. But you know what there isn't? There's no enforcer from the train service there to make sure you stay behind the yellow line. It's up to you, it's up to me to obey the sign. And the train is not liable in that case if it hits you because you failed to do so. God does not save us from our own self-destruction, but he gives you every opportunity to avoid it. He wrote a whole book, and he made it a bestseller so that we would know how to avoid our own destruction. The choice has been left up to us. Come back to the text with me for a quick second. We'll pick up at verse 8 where we left off. Then Jesus said to him, "Get up." I love it. Like, he's just so direct in this moment. "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." And at once, the man was cured. He picked up his mat and he walked. And then he ran into the religious people. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "It's the Sabbath. The law forbids you to pick up your mat and walk and carry your mat." The man replies, he's like, "Yeah, but the guy who made me well, he said to get up and walk, so I'm going to do what he said." And then they were like, "Who is this rapscallion who's going around healing people?" And he said, "I actually don't know. He didn't tell me his name." Notice the reaction of the religious people. Like, if one of you came to me and said, "Pastor, I got healed this week. I had cancer last week, and now I don't." What kind of reaction are you looking for out of me? Do you want me to point out all the ways in which, you broke the rules? Or would you expect me to celebrate with you? I think if you gave me that piece of news, you're probably doing so that I will celebrate with you. And it's probably right for you to expect your pastor to celebrate your miraculous healing. Yes? We all on the same page? I heard you. That's what you expect, and it's a reasonable expectation, right? Except this guy's pastor is like, "Yeah, but you didn't do it the right way." Right? I mean, it's maybe the ultimate jerk move of all time. The rules forbid this, and here's a reminder for all of us. It is so easy to read rules on paper and lose the heart and context of what God is really trying to do or say. Let me give you a real world example. If you don't know this, before I took this role, I was a worship pastor. I was one of these guys. And I participated in leading worship for a really long time. What I've learned is that depending on your background and tradition, and we've got people here who grew up in Baptist churches and Nazarene churches, and most of you have never even heard of Nazarenes before, Pentecostal churches, Catholic churches. We got people from all different backgrounds here, right? So depending on what background you come from, there's different ideas, traditions, rules that we've created for, how different things work in churches. And who gets to participate up here, I have learned, there are a number of different opinions about that. That I've run into. Some churches try to make sure that all of these people, every single one of them, are, following the right path, deeply committed to Jesus before they're allowed to use their gifts to help create the music that we all sing to on a Sunday. Okay, except I have been exposed to individuals who it seemed like they were fit to do this, and it turns out they were probably the most unfit person I've ever met to do this, because what they did and their behavior betrayed the basic ethos of the 10 Commandments, right? So some people try to create a system that's fail-proof. That person will never disappoint us or let us down because they have the anointing, or they, whatever label we gave them or whatever terminology we use. On the other hand, I've seen churches where it's okay if you're not sure about what you think about Jesus yet. We want to create a space for you to belong before you believe. And we want to show you, it's like taste and see that the Lord is good. Come and try out playing here so that you have something to compare your weekend warrior life at the bar to, and just see which environment is more compelling. The first church Mel and I attended together, where I was serving at the time, I saw this work so beautifully. The drummer in the band, his name was Bruce. He was an awesome guy. Had had a pretty rough life, spent a lot of time on the road doing the music thing, and he became a solid believer in Jesus. So one day he invited his friend Dan, who had just told him, I'm sick and tired of playing at bars. Is there anything better? And Bruce was like, well, you could come play at church with us. It's okay, Dan shows up, starts playing at the church. He's obviously not, in another system, he's not qualified. Somebody else's rules say Dan can't participate. But you know what happened to Dan? And his wife and his kids, by the way? Yeah, they all got saved because Dan was allowed to participate in music. And to me, that changes everything. I don't care what rules we made up. As far as I can tell, the Bible does not expressly say, thou shalt not do this or that with your worship team in 2025 on a Sunday morning. So because it's not here, I think it's left to us to use our discernment and our judgment, right? But the rules will never cancel out God's heart for your healing. Incidentally, I was reminded last night that Burnett Church has had almost exactly the same experience. I was at Mike Palmer's 60th birthday party last night. A few of us were there. And Mike's the guy who usually stands here, right? He's very happy all the time. So I love about Mike, right? Mike had that experience with you guys. He started coming because he liked Amy. And Amy was like, well, I go to church on Sunday, so you can come if you want. He wasn't a follower of Jesus at this time, but he really liked Amy. So he came to church, which I love. Amy just yeah, if you want to, cool. You want to hang out? Let's go to church. It's great. It's like a model for everybody looking to flesh out their life love. They don't come to church with you. So Amy was like, yep, you can come to church. Mike was like, oh, amazing. And then he started coming, and he started hearing the music, and he started singing, and then he was like, Amy, I could see myself doing that. And then some brilliant person, I don't even know who it was, some brilliant person was like, hey, Mike, I heard that you play music, because Amy told everybody. Why don't you come play with us? And Mike will tell you that meant everything to him. So good job. I don't know who was involved. I have no idea. I just know the story. And I heard it again last night. So I'm pretty sure it's public knowledge because they told a party room full of people. So Mike and Amy, I'm sorry if I stole your story. I apologize. I'm talking to the camera now so that they hear it when they watch. As we wrap up, let me ask you this. Did you ever get lost when you were little? Did you ever get lost when you were little? I can remember several times. And my mother tells me about several more. And when you're little and you're at the mall or the playground and you lose mom and dad, that feeling that starts to set in, the panic, right? Can you remember what it was like to be lost? All of a sudden, mom and dad vanished. You know what was almost universally true in all those cases? I was the one who moved. Mom and dad were where I left them. They were just standing there, waiting for me to find them, waiting for me to come back, usually yelling, and don't ask me why you couldn't hear them over the din of the mall or the park or wherever it was that we got lost. I was the one who moved. And my mom and dad were right there where I left them, looking for me. My question this morning as we consider this, right? Because we're in this series, this More Than Words series, because Jesus asks a really important question at the end of the Gospel of John. Do you love me? And I want us to think about these stories about who Jesus is and to love him more because we know him more. God is right where you left him. He is here and he is ready for you. We don't need to go anywhere or change anything. He is ready for our healing when we want to get well. So I can think of a few things that we might want to do this morning. Look, maybe this morning we need to repent of some of the ways in which the rules that we've made up are inadvertently blocking someone else from finding or celebrating their healing. Maybe we need to fall in love with the Jesus who will heal them and tell them to pick up their mat and walk on Sunday. We should ask ourselves, church, if we're ready for those imperfect ways God is going to invite others to belong before they believe and find healing on their way to even greater healing. Perhaps you're one of those people who's belonged but hasn't yet believed. But I want you to know that you don't have to do anything except offer or accept Jesus' offer for healing, because he's right here. He's right where you left him, ready to accept, ready to love, ready to heal, ready to forgive, ready to walk with you for the rest of your life. Maybe today is the day we need to stop looking everywhere else for healing, but look right at Jesus. And we have a great opportunity to do that this morning. We're going to participate in communion together. I don't know if you've done this in a while or you're familiar with it, right? When Jesus was just before he was betrayed, on the night he was betrayed, it says he gathered with his closest friends to share a meal. And he used bread and he used wine to symbolize what was about to happen to him. He was about to die for us. Because while we can't do anything to ultimately heal ourselves, Jesus can. And he knew that if he gave himself for us, he would live and he would show us the way to life. And so he gives this little ceremony in all of the ways people celebrate it. I don't know what your background is on communion. Maybe you're part of a more traditional or mainline church and you had to come and the priest would administer those things to you. Here, this is how we most typically do it. We offer it and we set it out, and it's an open table, which means if you feel as though you're ready, we invite you to the table. You don't have to be a member here. You don't have to, again, match our rules for it. I want you to have a conversation with God. Can I come to the table? And if he says yes, then I'm never going to say no. So we take bread, which represents Jesus' broken body, and we take wine, which represents his shed blood, and we give thanks together, right? Communion. We're communing with God, yes, and with each other, his people, the ones who, as he asked, do this to remember me. So here's what's going to happen. Band's going to play some music. I just want you, as you feel ready and led, to make your way to one of those 4 tables, front and back. Take the bread, put it in the wine. You can take communion there at the table. You can take it back with you to your seat. What is God asking from you today? Because here's what I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure he's asking something from every one of us. Pretty sure he's offering some kind of healing to every one of us. What is it today? What is it today? wrong way.